gotta ask real quick. I saw your post about Hubie Brown. You said you
Mhm.
stalked him in games that you both covered. You said you'd wait till halftime to pounce. He knew you were coming every game, usually on a Friday. He'd say,
Mhm.
quote, "Shoosh, kid, beat it, I'm working." So your interactions with Hubie just finished up his career. Just talk about that real quick, Mike.
You know, I had a big relationship with TT. As a decade. So they would send me like their notes from the inside the NBA and stuff like that. So they would have these press conferences, teleconferences. Every so often they have them prior to the season. They would have an All-Star break. They were having before the playoffs. They would be speaking to their talent. So the reason I'm saying this is because I would talk to Marv Albert, Barkley, Shaq, all of their personalities, right? The guy that I always wanted to speak to was Hubie Brown, because me being a Julius Irving fan, like he is my introduction to basketball. That's when Hubie was a coach, and he still had the white hair, and he had the coach for Bama went that wear the crazy, plaid jackets.
Plaid
Wimp
jacket, yeah.
Sanderson, his name?
Yeah, Wimp
Yeah.
Sands in
So
Bama, yeah.
Oh
this,
yeah.
yeah. So this is how I remember Hubie Brown. But what really moved me back then is when they would interview him, or I would see interviews of him, and I would see the depths of his soul. You know, being that I call it soul rock soul. That's what I call basketball. He had every element of soul rock soul within him. He's going to speak unapologetically about the game. And it doesn't matter who he's talking to. He doesn't care if you're offended by what he's going to say, because it's his love and soul for the game. I just would be like this little kid. I would start like right under the basket, being that the announcer's in a half court, and I would slowly move up to him, during halftime, because I know that was my only shot to speak to him. It took maybe 4 or 5 games, at least 4 or 5, maybe more than that, because again, if Hubie Brown is there, it's a Friday, it's a television game, ESPN, right? So I was trying to get just anything from him so I can kind of transfer his wisdom to the people who I associate with, being either fans or media or players themselves.
Hmm.
We're losing. Like, glad he's still here with us at this advanced age, but we're losing someone who is a student and a teacher and a god of the game. Because you're seeing now with social media, kind of ruling everything. Everything really is almost in like in an Ernest Hemingway sense. Is short bursts instead of elongated, long form, answers to questions that sports fans need to know about the sport of basketball. So, he is in the middle of that. He's a fixture. He's like Jack Ramsey,
Yeah.
God rest his soul. You
Hmm.
know, we lost him. He's kind of almost in that same type of game where he just speaks to the game itself. We call him Doctor. Hubie Brown should have been called Dr. Hubie Brown. That's
Yeah.
just what he is for the game. I love that man. Like I love that man. I can say that because I know that when I talk to him, he's going to give it to me right. There are a few guys that I talk to: Spencer Haywood, Bob Ryan, Rick Barry, and Hubie Brown was another one of those guys for me. I know that I can talk to, and he was going to give it to me straight, even if he was feeling bad that day, or he had a deadline, or had to go to the bathroom at halftime, or even get a little drink. He knew Michael Tillery was coming. He knew I was coming. I said, Mr. Brown. I always call him Mr. Brown. I didn't call him Coach. I call him Hubie. I call him Mr. Brown. I have to get this from you, because there's going to be time where you're going to be gone for the game. The same thing here in Philadelphia with Harvey Pollack. who was the 50-year statistician for the NBA and one of Wilt Chamberlain's closest friends. The reason why I stalked these personalities while they're still here with us is because Harvey Pollack died the day I was supposed to interview him. And I told him I want to sit down with him for 3 hours. And I was going to get everything. He was the first guy of this era. So we're talking back in the 70s, where he was the guy where all of the stats that people talk about now would have happened then. There was a story that he told me real quick about Wilt said to him, Michael Jordan only he doesn't make any mid-range of jumpers, right? So Pollack tracked them. He put them all on paper, and he said, "You're right." And he put them in the back of his car, and somebody stole his car.
Oh man!
So all of that paperwork, all of those advanced stats were gone in a time in the 80s where they would have been relevant and sped up the game of basketball from a moral statistically standpoint, not a statistics standpoint where people can kind of argue and place here and there when they want to talk about statistics. Harvey Pollack was that guy. He would walk around the Eagles, the Sixers arena with this little hunchback. He was very slow. I don't think anybody knew who he was. And I saw him and asked him, "Who are you, sir?" And this is when we formed a relationship. And unfortunately, he died. It hurt me for a long time. It really did. Almost in a way, I was on a plane to Kansas City where Buck O'Neil died. So I chased Al Davis and Ruby D. These people who are among us, who are titans on a very humble, almost complimentary level to life. Once they are gone, the data dies too. So when I interviews in any sports arena, I make sure I get a coach, I make sure I get a trainer, I make sure I get a former player who might be walking through. I get the radio guy. Dominique was good for that, and I get a fan. I want to make sure that the people see through my eyes what just transpired at the game because they were not there.
Yeah, that was great. Hubie is fantastic. I've said for years, Vinny, we've talked about him before. I always felt like I learned something watching Hubie Brown do a game. So he knew his stuff and he cared about the game. Not to besmirch some of the other color analysts out there, but it feels like their job is to be a color analyst. Hubie Brown's job is basketball. Right? Like he just enjoys the game of basketball. His criticisms were never to put down a coach, put down a player. It was, okay, they did this, should have done this. When the ball comes here, this is what you should look for. I still like short corner. I learned that from Hubie Brown. Where the weak side guy needs to come down, like that kind of stuff. And, the way he talked in the second person shouldn't have worked. Because I'm like, he's like, you need to double team. I need to double team. But it worked for Hubie. And like my takeaway is he loved basketball, particularly the NBA.
Yeah. And you talk about, his criticisms weren't, trying to be harsh or cutting. I always like, his commendation, because every time a play would work or it was executed right, there you go. There you go.